Welcome back to another episode of the CyberVault. I'm very excited today to be joined by John Filby. John is CEO of Outseer, and Outseer are a company leading innovation in fraud prevention and authentication. Since stepping into the role, John's been focusing on innovation, modernising the way we think about fraud detection, and helping organisations stay ahead in a threat landscape that is shifting fast. And in this episode, we'll explore how the world of fraud prevention is changing, from new innovation at Outseer to the rise of emotional and social engineering attacks, how organised crime is investing very heavily in this space. We're also going to look at what needs to change to make the world a safer place, what's next for Outseer, and John's advice for how we can all be better at protecting ourselves. John, it's honestly such a pleasure to have you here with me today. Thank you for joining us for the podcast. I suppose to get kick-started, why don't you maybe tell us a bit of an insight that since you've stepped into your role at Outseer, some of the key shifts and innovation that you've been driving?
Yeah, thanks, Kay. And great to be here with you. So thanks for having me on. We come out of RSA, so our roots are with RSA. RSA has a long heritage in cybersecurity and in providing anti-fraud solutions, and with roots like we have deep roots in really ensuring that there's trust in digital commerce. We were in a great position to start with. We actually, back in the day, we created a whole fraud prevention category called adaptive authentication or risk-based authentication, which was an amazing innovation at the time, over a decade ago. So the things that I've come in to really try to address are to really make sure there's really two things. One, really make sure that we've got our customers at the center of everything we're doing. So as we like to say it, right, we're not falling in love with our product set. We're falling in love with solving our customers' problems. And that's a really great true north for us. And it really helps, fuel our innovation. It always has, always will. The second thing is there's a higher purpose here to this business. So you mentioned making the world a safer place. I mean, that is our mission. It's a common cause we have with our customers. But we're providing solutions to our customers that help make the world a safer place, help protect their customers. The stakes are super high, like you highlighted off the top. And so, infusing that higher purpose into our mission at our company, I think it truly drives our best work. And that's super important given how high the stakes are. So those are really the two big changes I've been driving.
I think a very exciting time, and we can kind of touch base on this, but I think really relevant as well, because it's really underestimated, especially if you don't work in cybersecurity day to day, how vulnerable you may be, but also the change that we're seeing in the fraud space. And I know we've touched base on this, and one thing we definitely want to unpack is, because one of the biggest changes we've seen in how fraud is carried out is very much being led with like emotional and psychological manipulation becoming very front and central. Everybody's kind of got past the point of now knowing that you've got an urgent UPS text message coming through because your delivery is not arriving or whatever it may be. But obviously now we're also seeing these really kind of, concerning, impactful things that are coming through that might be like a family member that's kind of calling out in urgent distress or whatever it could be. I mean, how do you see this impacting the fight against fraud? And I'd also be interested to hear what some of the key, strategies that kind of people are using, especially around the emotional and psychological side of things.
Yeah, there's great points. You're absolutely right. I'd say two things. Sort of everything old is new again, and but there has been a perfect storm. So on everything old is new again. We're talking about scams today, but 20 years ago, we would have been calling we had scams, but we would have been calling them con jobs. And so, this business of fooling people into parting with their money, it's been around for a long time. So that piece isn't new, but we have had this perfect storm that has driven scams at what we call industrial scale. And that perfect storm is a combination of a real acceleration in digital commerce through COVID. And in particular, there's been a proliferation of instant payments and instant payment systems being rolled out around the globe. And, instant payments means instant fraud potentially. Social media, just the ubiquity of social media and the adoption of it has made personal information far more available to fraudsters. And then finally, just the availability of some new technologies like generative AI and agentic AI. You put all that together, and it's just created, frankly, a pretty incredible window of opportunity for fraudsters to jump through. And we in the industry are working hard to address that perfect storm and close that window right away. And you pointed out, like, part of that attack surface, this new emotional attack surface, is just the overall compound digital attack surface has grown significantly, and largely due, not completely due, but largely due to that emotional attack surface and scams, and just the ability for fraudsters to fool us into thinking that we're sending money somewhere else. So if you think about the history of fraud, it really has been about making sure that this is Katie doing this transaction. It's the genuine Katie. Now we have to make sure not only is it the genuine Katie, but is Katie actually doing a genuine transaction? So that's sort of doing that at scale is sort of the new thing.
Yeah. I mean, really, when you put it into context as well, it's pretty terrifying. I mean, it obviously also covers many areas, and you can look at whether it's from like a business perspective, a personal perspective, the different attack services, which, like you mentioned, we're just continuously seeing growing. I mean, what if somebody was to look at and understand what we mean by fraud prevention? I mean, what does it really mean today? Like, what are the biggest avenues to solving this?
Yeah, it's like, what, necessity is the mother of invention. I think for the fraudsters, it's like greed is the mother of invention. Like there's a lot of ingenuity in the fraudsters, and it's a real game of cat and mouse. And they're the organized crime world very good at finding weakest links in the chain and exploiting those swiftly. So the approach that financial institutions take is, what we call defense in depth. And there's no silver bullet answer to this game of cat and mouse. You just need to be adaptable, really adaptable. And so we think about, our job is to enable financial institutions to execute on defense in depth strategies. So, for example, you think about all the layers of defense you might want to have between your customers and fraudsters. You might want to make sure that, hey, if there's a phishing attack where somebody's just trying to extract or compromise credentials that could be used to commit fraud, like credit card information is a simple example, any kind of payment information, you want to block that. And that's a way ahead of fraud, actually, somebody trying to commit the fraud, this like pre-fraud. But you want to prevent the compromising of credentials that could be used to commit a fraud. Then we also, and we do that for our customers, we provide a service that does that. You also want to say, hey, if credentials have been compromised, let's find them on the dark web, because they're moving through a supply chain. Let's find them on the dark web and make sure that we can decommission those credentials for our financial institution partners before they get used to commit a fraud. So that's really scanning the dark web for compromised credentials if we haven't blocked that compromising in the first place. And then finally, if we get down to that moment of fraud and movement of value, we've got a transactional fraud, digital platform that can detect whether this transaction and all the surrounding data that we're gathering in looks like it fits a normal pattern, or is it more of a nefarious pattern? And that's where our data science comes in. And in the moment we do that, in microseconds, it's incredible, across thousands of transactions per second. So it's a pretty incredible capability we've got.
Yeah, because you mentioned the cat and mouse chase here, and I talk about this a lot because I think a lot of people talk about the fact that innovation often also precedes security, especially when it comes to like all the new products and stuff we have out there. But you also referenced earlier things like the adoption of generative AI and these wider technologies that people are exposing themselves to, even with social media. There's continuous kind of there's new apps always coming forward. I'm really interested to hear your thoughts on Do you think all these different kind of technologies? It's great that we've obviously got it, and like you mentioned there, it now allows you to be in a position where it takes seconds to do something that probably took significantly longer previously. but it's also obviously the other side, the bad guys or the threat actors or whoever, whatever you want to describe them as, they also have access to this technology. I mean, how do you think kind of companies can be in this position of trying to keep up with this cat and mouse? Because obviously sometimes you think you're 10 steps ahead, and then next thing you realize is actually you're 10 steps behind.
Yeah, it's look, it's a chase. It's a game that's, we colloquially we call it a game. It's serious business, obviously, but it's a game that will never end. It's kind of an uneven playing field for financial institutions, one of the most highly regulated industries in the world, and they play by the rules, and that means there's a certain pace at which they're able to move. uh, Fraudsters, just by their very nature, can be so much more nimble. But we do all have access to the same technologies, and we need to make sure that that we're using them. So, we're in a world now of you have to have an all cause fraud prevention platform in place. And as an example, we have that in place. You need to be able to ingest all kinds of data signals, including things like behavioral biometrics, and we can talk more about it, but it basically turns our devices into really advanced fraud sensors for any kind of fraud. And we're also leveraging generative AI and agentic AI. So the same tools that fraudsters are leveraging, we want to make sure we're leveraging. And as specialists in building fraud prevention solutions, we want to help our financial institutions level that playing field and just close these windows of opportunity, make those weakest links smaller and more brief, and just be as adapt make this make our industry and our fraud prevention, all those layers, make them more adaptable.
Yeah. And I think, we, and I mentioned it at the beginning in the sense that this is it's a rapidly evolving landscape. I mean, you could talk about that. It doesn't matter what part of kind of security you're talking about. It is because everybody can leverage all this new tech, but it's really interesting. And we'll definitely dive into some of the awesome stuff that you guys are up to at the moment, because I think it's really interesting and relevant to pretty much everybody at that point. And it's easy to forget that actually it's the everyday person that's impacted by this as well. But I also want to touch base on the fact that organized crime is really taking this seriously now. And I think if that's not a telltale sign of how critical this is, or how much of an impact this can have to not just everyday businesses, but obviously the government and kind of, like we've already mentioned, the everyday person, if they're investing in new tactics, I mean, how do we move ahead? And I know we've said this and we've joked that it's a cheesy line, but we really want to make the world a safer place for everybody that's in it. Everybody's using technology of all ages. I mean, how can we, well, like I say, move ahead in this to make sure that we're doing the right things here?
Yeah. We can't let fraud stop us from adopting technologies as we live our lives and move forward. Technologies that are in many cases so amazing and can enrich our lives. So yeah, it is happening. Fraud's happening on an industrial scale, and this emotional attack surface, the scams that are resulting from that. There's half a trillion of losses a year globally. I mean, that's bigger than most countries' GDP. So, in there, there's a photo. Maybe we can pop it up here of a little what was a quaint fishing village in Myanmar, before and after. Before it was turned into an industrialized scam compound where all the buildings that you see sitting there, we know that like there's security around those, heavily armed security forces around them. It is a scam compound that was built in a couple of years, and it's sort of become a metaphor for how scams have become industrialized. And so, yeah, back to what we were talking about. When you think about how seriously organized crime has taken this, and by the way, governments around the world and regulators around the world are also taking it seriously. There's legislation being put in place around the world to raise the stakes for financial institutions and to put, in some cases, liability on financial institutions for the payer or the payee end of these scam transactions. And so they need to have really strong controls and fraud prevention controls in place. And so you alluded to it, and I alluded to it earlier as well. These scams are being committed. This is digital fraud, leveraging technologies, fooling people and leveraging technologies, and so we have to do everything we can to educate the public on scams. There's some interesting interventions that we are working on in the moment to try to stop people, which we can talk a bit more about, and then making sure that we're leveraging all of these, latest technologies and the innovations that we're creating, so that the very tools and technologies that fraudsters are leveraging, we're also leveraging to combat them and to close those windows.
I think what would be really interesting to do as well here, actually, John, because you've alluded to a couple of really cool bits of tech that you're doing, and I think it'd be nice to break down some of what you're up to, because you've obviously referenced around some of the things that are helping on more of that instant level, because I think it's also really easy to kind of not realize, or again, if you're not exposed to this world all the time, of how instant it can be once you accidentally allow somebody to get access, or how that can really, I suppose, it's like that snowball effect. I'd be interested to know, what can you tell us about, because you've come in, you've really driven innovation, you've brought some really modern new ways to kind of not only think about fraud detection, but the response element as well. I mean, what can you tell us about what you guys have been up to, and some of the key things that I suppose are really going to start helping, obviously, financial institutions, but maybe kind of just the day-to-day people?
Yeah, sure. So there's some really important innovations. One would be uh, behavioral biometrics. And maybe before I jump into that, just I'll step back for a second just to give you the very high level on how we do what we do, right? It's think about all the data surrounding a transaction, that moment of transaction. There's transactional data, what's the amount, what's the country, what's the GeoIP location, what time of day is it, device identification, and some other data signals. Those are all data signals that tell us something about the transaction. And then we've got data science that we can push that all of that data into to say, hey, does that look like something that's normal for Katie, or does it actually look like something that's more nefarious? We know what nefarious patterns look like, and we also know what your normal patterns look like. And so it's really, really advanced pattern detection. It's math at the end of the day. And then our technology enables that math effectively to run at scale, at speed, and securely. And so when you think about, well, how do you make it better? You think about things like, what other data signals should we be looking at? So the way you use your device, let's say you're doing a transaction on your phone, the way you hold your phone, the way you're typing, the way you're swiping, that would actually change if you were being guided through a scam transaction.
Oh, wow.
And so we can track all those movements, and we're still protecting privacy data and all the rest. We always do that, but we can track all those movements. And again, there's an example. We know what normal looks like for you. We know what nefarious looks like. And so when I mentioned earlier turning our devices into really advanced scam or fraud sensors, that's an example of a signal we could bring into our models, and we could identify, oh, this looks like it could be Katie, but she might be in a bad transaction here. And then the question is, okay, well, great, you've got an innovation here with behavioral biometrics. That's a new data signal that helps you see something you might not have been able to see before. What do you do? And so we've also got, as an example, an innovation called adaptive intervention, where using generative AI and agentic AI together, we can say, okay, we need to intervene here with Katie. We know a lot about what's going on. We actually also know that she's on an active phone call right now while she's trying to do this transaction, which is a little odd. Yeah, we all multitask, but okay, give me a minute here. Maybe that's a danger signal. Maybe it's a red flag. So we can intelligently provide an intervention into that transaction, whether it's through chat or a human working off of a dynamically generated script. But we're generating a dialogue with you. It's contextual based on everything we know about what's going on, and that you're on a phone call, and we can start engaging you in a conversation using generative AI about, do you know what you're doing? You're on a phone call. Is that normal for you? Are you talking to somebody you know? And really, and it's not a static set of, a branch tree of rules. It's literally, we're leveraging the same technologies these fraudsters are leveraging to really cause you to try to snap out of what's been a fairly deep psychological manipulation that could have been going on for weeks. And we've also got some academic research underneath that to help inform that adaptive intervention. So those are examples of a few innovations together with, some real work in the psychology field to help us think about not only how do we identify, in this case, a scam, but how do we intervene to make sure that, okay, it's one thing to identify it and detect it, but how do you actually stop it?
That's unbelievable, to be fair, because I think, again, there are things you just don't think about. You don't think about the fact that such small, kind of minuscule changes in your behavior and I think it's at the point now where most people are using mobile banking. You get to the point where you have Monzo, for example, where it's only mobile banking. You can't even physically walk into an actual kind of bank for those guys. And so it's definitely, even if you're just looking from that perspective, you don't realize how those signs are a telltale, but definitely adds that layer of comfort and recognizing that a little kind of text could appear being like, hey, that just an FYI, that's not us on the phone to you, just in case you think it is. Because you're right, and I think a lot of the time people don't recognize that a huge thing about this is you want to try and prevent and at least intercept, because it's much harder once it's harder to kind of fix. I always use the analogy of if you can prevent the fire, it's much better than trying to put it out and then fix the damage. But if the fire's going to happen, you want it to impact as little as possible before before it does lots of irreversible kind of damage. I mean,
Yeah.
what's
Yeah. Yeah.
oh god, sorry.
No, I was going to say, what you're touching on it now, and you touched on it earlier. There's multiple levels of sort of human aspect to this, and how it takes its toll, how fraud and especially these scams take their toll on humans. But to your point, like the recovery of losses is pretty low, and and believe it or not, victims of scams, there's so much shame involved that in many cases they simply won't come forward to their bank, to say, hey, that $50,000, that $100,000, $150,000. I didn't mean to do that, and I thought that was going to be a legitimate investment, and I really trusted the advice I was getting from Timothy Chalamet, who seemed like he was a friend. Not to pick on Timothy Chalamet, but there's like a celebrity element to these things, and it always sounds crazy in hindsight, but in the moment, it's we're all susceptible to it. We're emotional beings at the end of the day, and so yeah, that the toll is on the victims, who there's this just not only the pecuniary loss, but the shame's incredible.
Yeah.
And the financial hardship can be incredible. But then all these ill-gotten gains in the hands of organized crime, and the kinds of things that they do with those funds, and some of the worst things that humankind does, including things like human trafficking. And then you've also got what's happening to the individuals at the banks whose job it is to protect these things in the front lines, and what they're dealing with day to day, and trying to make sure that they're doing all they can to prevent this, yet it's still happening to some degree, and frankly probably always will be. And I know from dealing with those individuals that are, our customers, how seriously they take it and the impact it has on them when these fraud events happen. So multi-level human toll, and it just raises the stakes.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
I think it really plays into that, the emotional and psychological manipulation in terms of how they're maybe getting access to individuals and so on. But it's also the fact that, like you mentioned, it really carries through. And I think it's so easy to forget. If you have in kind of organizations like organized crime that are taking this so seriously, you have to then acknowledge as an individual, as day to day, that the technology that these people have access to and the way that they're able to go about this, like you mentioned, hindsight is a wonderful thing, but you never have it in the moment. And it is that it's so advanced technology now that it's not at those days of a text message coming through where you're kind of like, oh, I can. Sometimes you get things come through and you're genuinely like, I can't tell if this is a scam. It's almost impossible sometimes to be able to tell. So the reliance on technology like what Outseer are building is actually so much more significant than I think so many people realize. And when we talk about making the world a safer place, but I think a lot of people don't realize how unsafe it actually is. I mean, what's coming next for you guys? Because you've talked about some really cool technology there, and appreciate that maybe things that are under apps that are that you kind of can't be announcing or anything like that. But I mean, what's on the horizons? What do the next kind of 6, 12, 18, 24 months look like? As much as I imagine it's quite hard to predict in such a rapidly changing landscape.
Yeah, look, we're going to continue to make sure that we're able to bring in capture the right data signals. I use behavioral biometrics as an example, but that it's one of many data signals we ingest today into our models and our risk engine, and there'll be more data signals that we'll have to be able to ingest. We have to make sure that we're managing the compute power behind our technologies, and we're able to continue to manage all these data points and harness the compute power, and we in some cases make sure we distribute it across, centralized all the way out to the device. So there's innovations there that are more technical and architectural, but we'll continue with those. When you get into a situation, transactions, like, are we going to allow it or block it, or maybe we need to do something more to make sure it's Katie in this case? That's called authenticating, and there's different types of authenticators and more secure authenticators, more certain authenticators that we're innovating around. So that's another area as an example. And then I already mentioned generative AI and leveraging all sorts of AI. We've always used predictive, for decades. Now we're using generative and agentic, and continue to leverage those latest and greatest AI technologies. We've always been AI based. So those are several examples. And the last thing I'd say is there's data sharing going on across the industry. There's a real cooperation, a spirit of cooperation about this, that we're all in it together as fraud fighters. And for a long time, we've been enabling data sharing across our customers, so they all have the benefit of these known fraud credentials across our network of customers. And that's an example, but there's a lot more examples of data sharing across the industry to really have a unified front and make sure that, financial institution A is benefiting from what's known over at financial institution B. So those are examples of the things that are being done that I think will just continue to make a difference.
Yeah, no, most definitely. And it sounds like there's, arguably from that business perspective, exciting things on the horizon, especially if you've got a team that are, when you're kind of driving, we've mentioned this word multiple times, but that innovation piece is really for front and center of what you guys are doing at the moment. Well, John, this has been a fantastic episode. I think to close out, for anybody that's been listening in, I think it'd be really helpful if you could give like one practical piece of advice, and this could be like to the everyday person, that when it comes to spotting and avoiding fraud, what would be that kind of key takeaway that they should take from this episode?
Yeah, I think, look, I'll give you a couple actually, if that's okay.
Of course.
If you're being asked to do something by somebody who's allegedly from some institution, like your financial institution or some organization, where you should have a known phone number you can call, like, get off whatever call you're on or whatever digital exchange you're in, and call that known phone number to confirm if this is actually something that is legitimate. A lot of people are doing something else with their family, like having some kind of family password. So if you are in trouble, that there's going to be a password that gets said that helps us know that you're legitimately in trouble. So that's another example. If it's too good to be true, age-old advice, it probably is, And so be careful about anything around a crypto payment, children in trouble, buying puppies, celebrities, Again, Timothy Chalamet and Florence Pugh, they're probably not really looking to be friends with us mere mortals, so maybe not, So there's a few examples, but yeah, it's just we got to be vigilant, and it's so hard in the moment.
Absolutely. No, some really helpful takeaways there, John. And honestly, thank you so much for joining and sharing not only some really powerful insights into the world of fraud prevention, but I think it's clear that innovation, awareness, they're going to be key at staying ahead of the curve here. And, it's going to be exciting to keep an eye on you guys and what you're going to continue to build over the next kind of, like we say, 6, 12, 18 months and beyond. But to our listeners, as always, don't forget to subscribe. Make sure to share this episode with your security peers. And arguably, you could probably just share this episode with most of your peers because it's definitely going to hold some value. But get connected with us on LinkedIn, get connected with John and the team on LinkedIn. But that's it for today. So thank you so much for tuning in, and I'll see you next time for more conversations shaping cyber.
Thanks, Katie.